Hey Juliana, this is probably my last read aloud classic because I have to leave this book behind and go back to home and see you so we can read the books we have at home. But for now, I'm going to read this selection from the book called Cheaper by the Dozen. Let's see if I can get a little better there. Okay. A dozen redhead children in the Gilbreths family make for a guaranteed onslaught of rollicking adventures, especially when faced with their intimidable father, whose quest for efficiency and innovation is relentless. This portion of their true-life memoir takes place on their annual excursion to Nantucket Island in Massachusetts. Chapter 11, Nantucket. We spent our summers in Nantucket, Massachusetts, where Dad bought 2 lighthouses which had been abandoned by the government and a ramshackle cottage which looked as if it had been abandoned by Coxey's army. Dad had the lighthouses moved so that they flanked the cottage. He and Mother used one of them as an office and den. The other served as the bedroom for 3 of the children. He moved a lighthouse? That seems silly. He named the cottage the Shoe in honor of Mother, who, he said, reminded him of an old woman who once lived in one. And the cottage and the lighthouse were situated on a flat stretch of land between the fashionable cliff and the bathing beach. Besides our place, there was only one other house in the vicinity. This belonged to an artist couple named Whitney. But after our first summer in Nantucket, the Whitneys had their house jacked up, placed on rollers, and moved a mile away to a vacant lot near the tip of Brant Point. After that, we had the strip of land all to ourselves. Probably moved because they were too noisy, having 12 kids. Customarily en route from Montclair to Nantucket, we spent the night in a hotel in New London, Connecticut. Dad knew the hotel manager and all of the men at the desk, and they used to exchange loud and good-natured insults for the benefit of the crowds that followed us in from the street. "Oh, Lord, look what's coming," the manager called when we entered the door. And then, to an assistant, "Alert the fire department and the house detective. It's the Gilbreths. And take the cigar cutter off the counter and lock it in a safe." "Do you still have that dangerous guillotine?" Dad grinned. "I know you'll be disappointed to hear that the finger grew in just as good as new. Show the man your finger, Ernestine." Ernestine held up the little finger of her right hand. On a previous visit, she had pushed it inquisitively onto the cigar cutter and had lost about 1/8 of an inch of her finger. She had bled considerably on the rug, and while Dad tried to fashion a tourniquet and roared inquiries about whether there was a doctor in the house. "Tell me," Dad remarked as he picked up a pen to register in the big book, "do my Irishmen come cheaper by the dozen?" "Irishmen? If I were wearing a sheet, you'd call them Arabs. How many of them are there, anyway? Last year when I went to make out your bill, you claimed there were only 7, and I counted at least a dozen of them now." "It's quite possible. There may have been some additions since then," Dad conceded. "Front boy, front boy, front boy, front boy, front boy. Your 4 boys show Mr. and Mrs. Gilbreth and their 7 or so Irishmen to 105, 103... 504, 505, 506, and 507. And mind you, take good care of them, too." He's telling them to show them to their room. When we first started going to Nantucket, which is off the tip of Cape Cod, automobiles weren't allowed on the island, and we'd leave the Pierce Arrow in the garage at New Bedford, Massachusetts. Later, when the automobile ban was lifted, we'd take the car with us on the Gay Head and Sandtacky, the steamers which plied between the mainland and the island. Dad had a frightening time backing the automobile onto the gangplank. Mother insisted that we get out of the car and stand clear. Then she begged Dad to put on a life preserver. "I know you and it are going into the water one of these days," she warned. "Does anybody, even my wife, have confidence in my driving?" he would moan. Then, on a more practical note, "Besides, I can swim." The biggest problem on the boat and in the car was Martha's 2 canaries, which she had won for making the best recitation in Sunday school. All of us, except Dad, were fond of them. Dad called them the "shut up" and the other "you heard me." He said they smelled so much. He didn't like the birds. He called them "shut up and you heard me." He said they smelled so much that they ruined his whole trip, and they were the only creatures on earth with voices louder than his children. Tom Greaves, the handyman who had to clean up the cage, named the birds Peter Soil and Maggie Mess. Mother wouldn't let us use those names, and she said they were Eskimo. Eskimo was Mother's description of anything that was off-color, revolting, or evil-minded, and we called the birds simply Peter and Maggie. On one trip, Fred was holding the cage on the stern of the ship while Dad backed the car aboard. Somehow the wire door opened and the birds escaped. They flew to piling on the deck and then to a roof of the warehouse. When Dad and the car finally stowed away, appeared on the deck, 3 of the younger children were sobbing. They made so much noise that the captain heard them and came off the bridge. "What's the trouble now, Mr. Gilbreth?" he asked. "Nothing," said Dad, who saw a chance to put 30 miles between himself and the Canaries. "You can shove off at any time, Captain." "No one tells me when to shove off until I'm ready to shove off," the captain announced stubbornly. He leaned over Fred. "What's the matter, son?" "Peter and Maggie," bawled Fred. "They're gone over the rail." "My God!" the captain blanched. "I've been afraid this would happen ever since you Gilbreths started coming to Nantucket." "Peter and Maggie aren't Gilbreths," Dad said irritatedly. "Why don't you just forget about the whole thing and shove off?" The captain leaned over Fred again. "Peter and Maggie who? Speak up, boy." Fred stopped crying. "I'm not allowed to tell you their last names," he said. "Mother said they're Eskimos." The captain was bewildered. "I wish someone would make sense," he complained. "You say Peter and Maggie the Eskimos disappeared over the rail?" Fred nodded, and Dad pointed to the empty cage. "2 canaries," Dad shouted, "known as Peter and Maggie, and by other aliases, have flown the coop. No matter, we wouldn't think of delaying you further." "Where did they fly to, Sonny?" Fred pointed to the roof of a warehouse, and the captain sighed. "I can't stand to see children cry," he said. He walked back to the bridge and started giving orders. 4 of the crew members, armed with crab nets, climbed to the roof of the warehouse, while passengers shouted encouragements from the rail, and the men chased the birds across the roof, back to the dock, into the rigging of the ship, and back to the warehouse again, and finally Peter and Maggie disappeared altogether, and the captain had to give up. "I'm sorry, Mr. Gilbreth," he said. "I guess we'll have to shove off without your canaries." "You've been too kind already," Dad beamed. Dad felt good for the rest of the trip and even managed to convince Martha of the wisdom of throwing the empty but still smelly birdcage over the side of the ship. The next day, after we settled in our cottage, a cardboard box arrived from the captain. It was addressed to Fred, and it had holes punched in the top. "You don't have to tell me what's in it," Dad said glumly. I've got a nose." He reached into his wallet and handed Martha a bill. "Take this and go down to the village and buy another cage. And after this, I hope you'll be more careful of your belongings." Dad had promised before we came to Nantucket that there would be no formal studying, no language records, and no school books. He kept his promise, although we found he was always teaching us things informally when our backs were turned. For instance, there was a matter of Morse code. "I have a way to teach you the code without any studying," he announced one day at lunch. He said we didn't want to learn the code, and that we didn't want to learn anything until school started in the fall. "There's no studying," said Dad, "and the ones who learn it first will get rewards. The ones who don't learn it are going to wish they had." After lunch, he got a small paintbrush and a can of black enamel and locked himself in the lavatory, where he painted the alphabet in code on the wall. For the next 3 days, Dad was busy with his paintbrush, writing code over the whitewash in every room in the shoe. On the ceiling in the dormitory bedrooms, he wrote the alphabet together with key words whose accents were a reminder of the code for the various letters. It went like this: A dash dot dash about, B dash dot 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 boisterously, C dash dot dash dot careless children, D dash dot dot dangerous, etc. When you lay on your back dozing, the words kept going through your head, and you'll find yourself saying dangerous, dash dot dot, dangerous. He painted secret messages and codes on the wall of the front porch and the dining room. "What do they say, Daddy?" he asked. we would ask him. Many things, he replied mysteriously, many secret things and many things of great humor. We went to the bedrooms and copied the code alphabet on pieces of paper, and then referring to the paper, we started translating Dad's messages. He went right on painting as if he were paying no attention to us, but he didn't miss a word. Lord, what awful puns, said Anne, and this, I presume, is meant to fit into the category of things of great humor. Listen to this one. Be it ever so bumble, there's no place like comb. Instead of be it ever so humble, there's no place like home, he put be it ever so bumble, there's no place like comb, like for a bee. And we're stung, Ern moaned, and we're not going to be satisfied until we translate them all. I see dash dot, and I hear myself repeating careless, children. What's this one say? We figured it out. When ignorance is bliss, it 'tis folly to be white. And another, by courtesy of Mr. Ivan S. Cobb, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may diet. And still another, which Mother made Dad paint out, 2 maggots are fishing in dead earnest. I don't get it. Oh, I kind of get it. That one is Eskimo, said Mother. I won't have it in my dining room, even in Morse code. All right, boss, Dad grinned sheepishly. I'll paint over it. It's already served its purpose anyway. Every day or so after that, Dad would leave a piece of paper containing a Morse code message on the dining room table. Translated, it might read something like this. The first one who figures out this secret message should look at the right-hand pocket of my linen knickers hanging on a hook in my room. Daddy. Or, hurry up before someone beats you to it and look in the bottom left drawer of the sewing machine. In the knickers pocket and in the drawer there would be some sort of reward. A Hershey's bar, a quarter, a receipt entitling the bearer to 1 chocolate ice cream soda at Coffin's drugstore, payable by Dad on demand. Some of the Morse code notes were false alarms. Hello, lad bait. This is one on the house. No rewards. But there may be a reward next time. When you finish reading this, dash off like mad so the next feller will think you've got some hot clue. Then he'll read it too, and you won't be the only ones who got fooled by Daddy. As Dad had planned, we all knew Morse code fairly well within a few weeks. Well, enough, in fact, so that we could tap out messages to each other by bouncing the tip of a fork on a butter plate. And when a dozen or so persons all attempt to broadcast in this manner, and all of us preferred sending to receiving, the accumulation of sounds was nerve-shattering. A present-day equivalent might be reproduced if the sound effects man on Gangbusters and Walter Winchell should go on the air simultaneously before a battery of powerful amplifiers. And that's the end of that story. A funny man who had 12 kids and taught them all Morse code. The end.